say, and then they took it, and the Babylonians took it from them, and then I think like the Greeks took it from them, and then you get the Romans took it from the Greeks, and then you have the Persians in there, and the, what was that, Seleucids. I mean, everybody's sort of been telling it. But whether it's Egyptian, Babylon, Greek, Persian, Roman, or whatever, they're all basically telling stories, mythologies, legends of the same people, things that were happening on the planet, okay? It was a much different time. There was huge chaos. There was a great, you talk about a clash of kingdoms or realms or dominions. It was so much more in your face. Now, then you get into the time of the law and the testimonies. Things calm down a bit because of the seed of Abraham. This is what God did. You see, it's a genetic thing. Oh my gosh. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses. You start with Abraham, who truly, I mean, his father was like the lead general in Nimrod's army. And Nimrod became a mighty man. You unpack that. He became like an X-Man. A lot of these people, this is what we're getting into, where this whole idea of being X-Men, or, what today they would call, the Avengers and all these people. And look at on your TV shows today. Everything is pointing to this. Everything is coming back to these mythologies and these stories and games because there's a thread of truth. See, there's nothing new under the sun. This rings true. There's an element to this. But Abraham is, when it talks about the salt of the earth, he said that you are the salt of the earth, you're the preservative. What that means is genetically, because Abraham, when he called him and said, I'm going to make you a great nation and a father of many nations, he was going to use the seed of Abraham to go off into all the earth and to and that's the whole point with the seed, get in there and genetically get in there. Again, to all the people groups, to kind of keep it a level playing field, to keep this wickedness. And, if you look at Sodom and Gomorrah, to keep this relentless bloodline war from getting the upper hand again, where he didn't have to, use a flood again. I mean, he said, we're going to come down. He's going to take care of the problem by fire at the end of the age. But that's one of the things my major points. What is fire? What are we talking about? What is the physics, truly, of what's going on? So anyways, in these 2,000 years, but this is the time of Moses and the law. But my problem here with my rabbinic Jewish or Talmudic friends and brethren, we are of the same family, I believe, as the 12, part of the 12 tribes. And I'm going to get into definition of the Gentiles, but so much of them, they do not want to go back into this history of the chaos in any great extent. They want to think that everything just started with Moses. Let's just keep it neat and tidy. Let's keep this little box of the law and the testimony. Let's just hunker down in that. And you can't do that because there's a lot of information you don't have, that if you don't get into that, it always stayed with the sages, with those deep in Torah. That's why we have the Zohar, we have the oral Torah, because this understanding did stay with them. But by and large, as the nations, and especially the dispersions, they just became less and less, in a sense, an issue, which is a good thing. But I think what we have to understand in these 2,000 years is the incredible amount of dispersion of seed that was being sown out there, of this Abrahamic seed of righteousness that was Yah's seed. See, because if you look at idioms where you can exchange one through there, Abraham's seed is Yah's seed. These are his genetics. He's keeping himself. This gets into some really deep stuff, but we won't go there. You start with the exile of the northern kingdom, and then you just start with a lot of Esau, and you have so many groups already dispersed and intermingling. That started with Abraham. He had another whole wife, Keturah, kids by him. I think he had 3 wives. I'd have to check on that. You have then the whole, the lines of Ishmael, the lines of Esau, Abrahamic. Then you get into, but there is a little, and I'm going to get into this theological thing why he says that Israel is through the seed of Isaac, because, and not genetically, not so much in the sense of, in the prize, but by faith. There is a certain in this, that gets a little deep. I don't want to get off on that rabbit trail. But there is so much. See, because like in here, all right, so Jacob, let me just give you this. Abraham was right at about the 2000 from creation. Isaac was at about 2050 born, from creation. Jacob is at about 2100 years from creation. Okay? That's a long time. But now Moses was 2400 years from creation. David begins his reign right about in the middle at about 3,000 years from creation, okay? But the dispersions all through this time and this time have just been huge, and so much of it has been unrecorded. We really always stick with the 10 tribes being dispersed, the northern kingdom. The house of Judah went into dispersion or exile for their 70 years, and not all of only a very small remnant came back to the land and to rebuild the temple. So most of them really did stay in Babylon. So then they're out there in the nations. You had, from the tribe of Dan. Dan was just from the get-go, just as a seafaring people, the stories of Dan just going all over the world, hooking up with the Phoenicians, ending up in Ireland and the Isles of the Sea, which was at Tarshish. England then was known as Tarshish. There is stories from Moses, some of the tribes leaving him and going off. There is so much in here. When the temple was destroyed, the second temple in 70 AD, and it's the saddest story of history. Right off the bat, I think it was Vespasian. Was it Vespasian? Forgive me if I have some of my characters wrong, but took 70,000 of the most prime Jewish young fighting men to Rome with him to be marched in the parade, the processional parade that they had conquered. They had finally subdued the great nation of Judah, and they got lost into history. They dispersed. We don't understand. So many of the southern kingdom living in the time when the temple was destroyed were sold off to the nations as slaves and flee. Then you have the whole Essenes, the early followers of that way, the earlier Nazarenes. I don't want to call them Christians because that's a latter understanding. The first followers of Yeshua, they already left town before 70 AD. This is because, if you really stick close to the prophecies, your safest bet is to stick with the Holy Spirit and know the plan ahead of time. A wise man foresees the evil and maketh the plan. The early Christians knew the temple was they were out of Jerusalem. They were out of there by that time. But we have to understand all that seed continued, and then all through the ages. Oh my goodness. So many times in history, so even the fact of Joseph Arimathea leaving, right at the time of Jesus with a whole contingent. He was Jesus' uncle and going back to England. There's so much understanding now coming. So many of the dispersed tribes went along the Silk Route and all the way through, Pakistan and India and Afghanistan and all the way out to Japan. They're finding pockets of clannish tribal people groups to get still together. In Japan, they sent a bunch of Jews out to study them because, they're have all these Hebrew words in their language. They do all these Hebrew customs. They do this festival. It's like one of the festivals carrying the Ark of the Covenant and, all these different things. They're finding them all over in Africa, all over the world, people. This is a worldwide phenomenon. This is Yah's plan. It worked. And so now the question is, what's the point? Where are we going with all this? But one of the saddest ones I just read, because a lot of the tribes went up into, I've said this before, this is the whole thing about America's founding by these groups of Northern Europeans is not an accident, because these people were Torah people. They didn't know it. They'd lost their identity to, but they were really, a lot of them were the dispersed tribes. They came up to America. But the Irish, who had huge pockets, Jeremiah, I'm telling you, and I believe the evidence is absolutely, in my opinion, conclusive. I mean, there has to be an answer to these things. Where did Jeremiah go? There's no record of his death. I mean, that he fulfilled the prophecies in Ezekiel. He took the tender twig. Because he was to pull down and root out and destroy kingdoms, but he was also to plant and to establish. So he took the daughters of Zedekiah, I think 2 of them, and they took them. He ended up in Ireland. He ended up all the way up in the islands of the sea, and he planted them there. And Tepetia, and this whole story, and the scone, the stone, the coronations of it. I mean, just Google all this stuff. It's fascinating, but it's true. There's so much truth to this. So this is what I mean. We cannot keep letting the enemy just teach you your history and then be done with it. Take the test and you're done, moving on. You have to prove all things. But the Irish, there was this whole thing that the slave trade. See, and I'll tell you how you know that your culture, your governments or your people group or whatever has been infiltrated by Canaanites is when the slave trade really kicks up and it becomes huge. England at this time, around the 1650s, Ireland, there's such a bad blood between the English and the Irish, and a lot of it I believe you can track because the kingship had been planted and it had been overturned once, twice, 3 times. I mean, I just can't go into all this stuff. Ended up in England. There was such a battle going on, infiltration into the kingly line, and then why the Irish were so picked on. But they sold off 100,000 Irish children just in 1 decade in the 60s to slavery. This cleaned up phrase of indentured servants, some of the greatest slave trade in the 1650s up until about the 1700s was in the Irish. Over 300,000 were sold as slaves all over the world, many of them ending up actually in New England, in the West Indies, and Virginia. These Irish, and a lot of they were a lot cheaper than the black slaves coming from Africa because they came such a long distance and they were of a stronger stock. But these Irish slaves were so much cheaper. And then they ended up actually blending. Mulatto comes from the Irish women and the African slaves to make a race that they could sell cheaper. I mean, the whole mentality. But that's how you know. And the fact that slave trade is at an all-time high today in the world, especially white children trafficking, slave trade, it's just a tip-off, people. These Canaanites are at it again. They have we just have to get back so we can understand what's going on, so we can administer justice, because I will tell you the main thing God wants. He doesn't want your sacrifices, or he doesn't want you going. He wants you to do justice, and the only way you're going to do justice is if you know what's going on, so you can render true judgment. Okay. I got to get back to the last 2,000 years here. We are here now with the Messiah. This is why John the Baptist, the greatest prophet that ever lived, was able to go out. He had the timing down. See, there's so much about the timing of the prophecy and different things in the Zophar, in the numerology, so I'm going to make 2 quick points because I'm running out of time. So, because John the Baptist was of the tradition, or I guess I'll use the word tradition. He was of the school of thought where these were the keepers of the secrets, the Nazarenes, which means is seen. Nazarene is seen. This is the people group. This is the group that was genetically keeping the bloodline pure for the Messiah, was keeping all of the secrets. The oral Torah was keeping the information, the sages, and was living the life. They were a communal. But this is what I have to say, which is really interesting, how they rewrite our history. So, because the Essenes were totally written off the book. I mean, we only had 2 quotes about them, one from Josephus, and I think it was from Pliny, the elder, or else it was Philo, one of the 2, until the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then people are like, well, where'd this group come from, Well, now we know, okay? But I have to make this point. I was doing some reading because because what we have to understand, true prophetic insight will tell you where you are on the prophetic calendar. We are coming now to the end of this time of the Messiah where he is going to appear. The 2 days This is the point. Until the third day. See, in the third day, this is known as the third day, this millennium, from the 2 days that started when Messiah came, because they understood his two comings. All right? In the restoration of all things, the house of Judah and the house of Israel, the Christian and the Jewish world, we're going to get our minds together. We're going to get this understanding, and we're going to understand who we are. We're going to understand what God's been doing. And the third group I want to add to this, because this is my conclusion. I mean, I guess I'm not writing it in stone or anything, but the Hermetic tradition, which is another whole tradition out there of writings. I think Hermes tried, oh gosh, you're going to ask me to say it, tried Trismegistus, which means thrice, 3 times, Hermes the Great. There's a guy in history who's written things. I think that was Enoch, okay? Because the flip side I was going to say, truth, it wasn't always, there's always been a battle between the bloodlines, but in many cases, this is where, this whole concept of the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent will kind of battle it out to the last day, to the day of his wrath, which we're coming up on. But I do think Hermes is Enoch in understanding, and it went down to Noah and Shem and Abraham like that. That's great. But that information is all pre-Abraham. Okay, so Abraham did start a new thing. So you could put all that Hermetic tradition here, which there is much of it in the earth and in the literature. And what they say is, and even Augustine, a great Christian scholar reading the Hermetic information, said he was like a pre-Christian prophet to the ancient world. Well, because, see, God doesn't really change his story per se. It's just the different groups, depending on where you are on the time frame, and different things. But that's an important thing to understand. But I was working this verse. It's amazing what you'll discover when you work verses. But a lot of my information is prophetically going to a destination, which is when all Israel will be saved. In Romans 12:2, and I'm in Romans 12:1, it says, Paul is saying, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery. This is a mystery. It doesn't mean it's something you can't never know. It's just as deeply hidden in Torah. It's only revealed, not to the profane, people who couldn't care less. It's revealed. You can get this understanding by deep Torah study. If you love the word, okay, it's a mystery. Brothers, so that you will not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. Now, I guess I'm not going to have time to unpack the Gentiles, and that's going to be for next week because it's huge. We've got to get the correct understanding of what the big rub was, what's up with these Gentile nations, okay? So we won't go there. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written. See, the Israel of God, the elect, the Israel that comes through Isaac, okay? Now there is a genetic, that's why he says that not all Israel is Israel. He just goes back and says that earlier in the chapter, Gentiles, but if they're transgression, I can't find that, I don't have where it is, but in other words, not all Israel, just because you're genetically, just because you were born in a Christian home doesn't make you a Christian. Just because you have Israeli blood or genetics, it doesn't make you part of all Israel. You have to come in through faith, like through Isaac. This is the whole idea. But the word Israel here in this verse, as I was looking at it, it's a whole different, it's not the word for Israel referencing the Old Testament, which means a prince of God, an overcomer, a prince of God. It is a word, and this is, again, one of these little things where you get to Strong's and it gets to a point that says it is of unknown origin. They don't know where it comes from. And they will admit that there's huge discrepancies in the understanding, and some scholars say this, some scholars say that, and then they finally say, well, we don't really know, it's an unknown origin. Okay, but this Israel, the root of this word is going back to, it's transliterated from an Old Testament word, 3478 in your Strong's, but the root of this word Israel goes back to this root word 3478, which is a transliteration of the word Nazareth. Totally devoid from, and I'm looking, what are they talking about? Israel and Nazareth. Okay, and this is one of the things that you will understand when you understand that Jesus was from Nazareth. The root word is a Nazarah, okay, which, and again, the scholars are all over the place on its roots, but it would make sense. All of these will make sense to me now, as I understand. Let me just say this. The city of Nazareth, where Jesus was born, that is a complete Gentile Christian fabrication. There was no city of Nazareth, okay? And we know this, there is no city of Nazareth mentioned in Josephus, in the Talmud, or anywhere in the Old Testament. And they recorded all the cities, okay? Nazareth is from the word Nazarah. And what it is referencing here is the same thing as the Nazarenes or the Essenes. Yeshua comes from a branch, a denominational offshoot, because the word is sprout or branch, of the Essenes, who they had pockets of them where they were all through the country. They were actually all over the world. They're in Egypt. They were all over the place. Okay, these it'd be like the Amish and the Mennonites today. They have pockets of them all over. But my point is, these are the name Nazareth. The point is that they were the keepers of the secrets. So here you have Israel referenced back to a word, the root of Nazarah, which means sprout or branch, protectoress, guard, or watchtower. And those are all Old Testament words. And those are all words that because remember that Jesus is a twig or a branch or of the root of Jesse. And there's a whole prophecy in Isaiah where a root would grow up. David's family comes from many of this branch, this Torah Essene branch. So what I'm trying to say is the city, it has nothing to do with the city of Nazareth. It has to do with the fact that he was Northern Essene, which is a group where they could marry. That's why Mary and Joseph, they married her. She comes from this bloodline and this group within John the Baptist. On the flip side, it comes from Qumran, which is a celibate community down there in the desert. And at times they know this from the archaeology, they must have all gotten together for the festivals, okay, at different points. But this is so interesting because the root of Nazareth as a sprout, this gets back into this whole, like, as the keeper of the secret. It's not this whole idea of, I guess, how do I say this? That it's not so much your lineage, or if you went to the right Torah school, or if you come from, it's really, where is your heart? Is as a keeper of the secret, is it everything to you? Are you living for the Messiah to come? Okay, and this was not true of all Israel. I mean, many people just living their life. They just happen to grow up, like many people today, nominally in their denomination, just doing their thing, living their life, but they're not really attached, or they are not really growing out in a real sense of getting life sap, living spiritual soul life sap from their root system. So I think that's really it, because Israel, again, the Israel does represent Zion, and this is the point. He says this is, there's admonitions all over the New and Old Testament. You better be careful, because you might wake up and realize you are not in the Olam Haba. You're someplace else entirely. So don't take it for granted. Don't take any of this. Prove all things. Hold fast to that which is true. Because now I feel like I have a handle. A lot of what went on in these 2,000 years of complete chaos, this is the root of the problem. It has never really gone away. Basically, it went underground. And basically, the law and the testimony and the Messiah and the salt has been able to keep it at bay. But believe me, Satan Hasatan has been very busy. And at the end of the age, at the day of wrath unfolds, he thinks he's going to be able to take on Yahushua at his coming with a whole lot of the same old tricks that he tried up here. So that's where I have been trying to go. That's where I'm going to go in much greater detail in a lot of future episodes. So I hope that that blessed you. I want to make one more last point because I think I have time for this last point. One of the things about this chaos, the thing is that, God is, let God be true and every man a liar. The Noahide laws, even in the book of Enoch, you understand, God has always made very clear how you play the game in life, okay, to be on his side, to be on the the winning team. The Noahide laws, here's a quote from, I had a great discussion online with somebody who's following my YouTubes and someone also deep into this research, and we were talking about the story of Joseph's wife, Potiphar's adopted daughter, who happened to be the daughter of Diana, who happened to be the one daughter that I believe it was Leah had among the 12. So we always knew there were 12 boys, but there was one daughter, Diana. And what happened to her? She was raped. She was physically dragged out of her home and by a Canaanite. And this explains a lot of this in understanding why Levi and Simeon took on the town and this whole backdrop. You can, from the legend of the Jews, from the Targums, from the book of Jasher. So much information, totally able to piece it together, confirms the record of the word, and lets us know. But one thing it said, this is what the boys said to their father. They said Noah and his children, surely death is due this man and his household, because the Lord God of the whole earth commanded Noah and his children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, that they're called these the Noahide laws. The 10 commandments have always been around, that you don't rob, commit adultery, / fornication, the sexual sins, and not and there's others, and there's not one of all the people of this city spoke a word against him as Shechem took and raped the daughter of Jacob. I mean, there is context to all this stuff, and this is what we need to put it all together. So on that note, I want to say good night. God bless you. And I hope that this time of the resurrection is the most blessed and joyful time of one of the spring feasts that you can be celebrating right now. So thank you and God bless.